The pooling of media rights back at the discussion table, it could change college football.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you all, especially my everydayers, for helping make that the case. The latest on Georgia Tech's quarterback battle. Fascinating development down there for Brent Key's squad. And do I buy Baylor as being able to surge in the Big 12? At the moment, I kind of do. I kind of do. That's all on today's show, which, for today's first segment, features Christian Rao of Locked On Kansas State to discuss the matters of the day. Ross Dellinger reported there was a meeting of a number of, we'll just say, higher-ups in the college football world, including representatives from the Pac-12 and other Group of Six conferences and the Big 10 and the Big 12 and the ACC. And they're trying to get together with some lawmakers, Christian, to try to amend the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, which prevents the pooling of media rights in college sports. And the SEC and the Big Ten are notably against this particular notion. And it's very understandable as to what, we don't have to overthink too hard to try to find the reasons why everyone is interested here. If media rights were pooled, they would be more evenly distributed, and you wouldn't have a financial gap between the Big 10 and SEC and the Big 12 and ACC, and then an even bigger gap between the Group of Six conference like the Pac-12. You wouldn't have that gap of literally tens of millions of dollars. Does that mean this proposal or this idea, in your view, is just dead on arrival?
Yeah, 100%. And because of the top tier programs, that when you get to a balanced pool of the number that will be distributed among the 136 or even the 70, if you're going just in the power conferences, it would still be too low compared to some of the big name programs that could get that on their own. When you're speaking of the Notre Dames, you're speaking of, either the Big 10 by themselves or the SEC by themselves. They see themselves as a tier one. And let's be honest, with the way they've had their media deals over the this last time right now, before heading into the ultimate crucifixion point, if you will, of 2030, they've been seen as that tier one right now. So when it comes to the Big 12, when it comes to the ACC and the rest of the group of 5 or 6, however you want to look at it, yeah, they're sitting back as a tier two, and I do think it'd be dead on arrival if it did happen, 100%.
Well, not everybody feels that way, or else the pursuits wouldn't make it as far as they have gone so far, because there are discussions taking place in the United States Congress in a bipartisan manner, which is how a lot of these talks have actually been taking place, because a lot of folks agree that something's got to be done about college sports. And whether you think it's a good idea for Congress to get involved with that, they're talking about this stuff. They're putting bills forward and trying to at least get the ball rolling to figure out how they can navigate all of these things. But the whole notion of pooling media rights, look, inherently it sounds kind of unfair. It's out to those that make a bunch of money, of course, and more than the rest, because that's money that they've earned. It's not as if the deals have been illegally negotiated or at the expense of someone else. No, why does the Big Ten have the highest per school distribution for 2026 and beyond? Because that's the deal they negotiated, because they've built up their brands in the media right. But just think about this. If your inherent reaction is, no, you can't pool the media rights, no, that's not fair, they earn more and all that sort of stuff, the per school payouts from these conferences to their respective institutions through the media rights are, for the most part, even. FSU and Clemson negotiated to get a little bit more from the ACC, of course. But for everybody else, it's the same. And I hope we're not sitting here operating under the notion that Ohio State and Northwestern have the same amount of television value to the Big Ten media deal, because of course they don't. And if you even look at the NFL, and plenty of folks like to throw out the line, this is professional sports, it's not amateur anymore. Okay, there's some merit to that argument. Well, guess what? The NFL doesn't give it out based on who generates the most revenue. The Cowboys are the most watched team. They don't get more money than the Cardinals. They don't. So I think there's an inherent pushback to it because the arguments are easy to make, but it's not as if in sports there's no precedent for, hey, here's the money that gets made. Yeah, some schools or brands really contribute to this more than others, but we're going to give everyone an equal share because the argument would then go that that's in the best interest of the league, right?
Yeah, and I think it would be for the best interest. I just don't think that every seat at the table is going to be willing to step forward and do this. We've seen so much discourse about seeing different conferences believing in having the ammo to say that they're the better conference than everybody else. And then the way that they've fought over media deals over the last decade, they have found ways to do that. I find it interesting that the Big Ten is being involved in these conversations. That is something that definitely interests me, no doubt, because I do think that they stand on a really solid leg to make themselves feel like they are seen as a tier one that I continue to keep going back, especially after their recent success in not just football, but basketball and other the top revenue sports. They continue to do that. I think that if schools inside the conferences and commissioners inside of conferences like the Big 12 and like the ACC find a way to get this happening and the G6 pulls along, I think this is better overall for the sport. And when you look at it from a Big 12 lens, is something that I tend to do at first, the Big 12 has been more aggressive than I think any other conferences in trying to change things and trying to change things and be the most aggressive league when it comes to expanding across time zones, global games, new sponsorships, new media. So if maybe they can push those type of incentives across to maybe other smaller conferences or what you see as another partner conference in the ACC, at least in that same tier 1B, if you will, I think this could help get a lot of ammo. But what about the SEC? Do they play ball? That's the big question.
Yeah, I don't know that they would. According to Ross Dellinger, no SEC president participated in Monday's call, and the Big Ten had very few representatives that were there, but they were at least there. And also, by the way, what is being discussed is Senators Cantwell and Schmidt have authored a bill to open the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961 to give conferences the option to pool media rights. But here's another discussion, because I know you, like myself, follow a lot of G6 football out there. And the Pac-12 starts this year on July 1st, 2026, and you've still got the MAC and the Mountain West and the American. And the MAC, American, and Pac-12 were, I believe, the G6 conferences that were represented there in these talks. What do you do with those? Because in no world, again, I wouldn't think, are you going to have a Pac-12 school getting the same media rights distribution as, we don't even know what the Pac-12 figures are going to be under their new deal. They still haven't released that. Most guesses are in kind of the $7 to $8 million range. You're telling me they're suddenly going to pull even with a Big Ten school that's slated to get $90 million this year? That can't be. So would the Power Four exclude the Group of Six? Would it be just, more equitable, like Big Ten's up here, Group of Six down here? Would it suddenly move to just level a little bit, but there's still a gap? Those are seriously difficult questions to answer. And then to all of this, whether you're talking about the broadcasting rights or the executive orders or what have you, there's always that thought in the back of our minds of, is any of this enforceable? Is any of it legal?
Yeah, and then at the end of the day, if they don't follow through, we're all 136 are seen as the same, right? Which I do see that's completely a skeptical take. As much as I would love to see the Pac-12 be seen as a Power 5 conference again, and as much as they probably want to fight for that to happen, that's not the case. That's just not the way it is anymore, and we just have to live with that. But if you don't go that route, and let's be honest, it's probably not going to happen, you then have to change the conversation to be like, okay, well, if only these conferences are able to get this much revenue, and in this new world of transfer portal and NIL, where the mighty dollar wins it all, we're seeing that happen with the Big Ten, with the SEC, and the Big Ten who's finally being able to keep up with said SEC over the last decade or so. Do you then start shifting the way that we see the college football playoffs? Does the Super League conversation come back into play? There's a whole bunch of things that in the next 4 years, 3.5 years, if you will, to that 2030 media deal is going to just have to find a way to answer questions. A lot of things rely on what happens with these media deals. When it comes to revenue sharing, I don't think it's just about football, Spencer. I think this is all about leverage for the next 20, 25 years to come. And we're going to find that out in the next 3 years. It's going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, it will. And I was talking about this with my brother recently that, for a while I've wondered, like, how long can realignment really stay in the news? The next big one could happen in 2030. That's just so far away. And then I look down and I go, wait a minute. That's like 4 years away. But moves are made a couple of years in advance. And, well, that's how we keep the content flowing all year round.
You remember when we were sitting there fighting for toilet paper? Cut that in half. That's how long we have until 2030. 3 years away.
Christian Rao, Locked On Kansas State. Appreciate the time, as always. One of the most intriguing quarterback battles in the country is at Georgia Tech, or is it even a battle at all?
I'm Clea Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. The NCAA Women's Basketball Tournament Elite Eight wrapped up with the UConn Huskies staying undefeated at 38-0 after a decisive win over Notre Dame, while the UCLA Bruins rallied past Duke behind a dominant second half performance. On the other side, the remaining 1 seeds in South Carolina and Texas will be determined after their matchups against TCU and Michigan, respectively. Next up, the Final Four is set for Friday in Phoenix, with the winners advancing to the national championship on Sunday. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Thank you for making this show your first listen or your first view every day. If you tune in to every episode and want to level up and get ad-free audio with other perks, join the Locked On Everydayer Club. You can find the link below in the description of this episode. Ad-free audio, members-only Discord access, and other perks too. Click the link below and become a Locked On Everydayer Club member today. Let's go to the Yellowjackets and my man, Brent Key, one of, I think, the most likable coaches in all of college football, and one of the most likable hosts we have at the network, Jarvis Davis of Locked On Georgia Tech, joining me here to break down this Georgia Tech quarterback battle. And Jarvis, I've talked about this one a couple times here as spring has continued to roll along. Hard to believe we're almost a third of the way through April. It's going pretty fast, but what's the latest on this Georgia Tech battle? Because I think it's fascinating. Alberto Mendoza, mostly because of the last name, I think is the one people are most familiar with. But is he the leader right now? What's your take?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, man. Because here's the thing, man. Coming into this thing, like, they tried to frame it as a four-man competition. And, playing college football myself, there's no such thing as a four-man quarterback competition, sir. Because you don't have that amount of time to work those guys in to get quote-unquote first-team reps. So when you think about just from a timing perspective, you don't have time to get four guys in there. So I think that Alberto Mendoza, to answer your question, Alberto Mendoza is the leader. Yeah, that is absolutely spot on. And I think that the only movement that I've really seen just from a production standpoint and just kind of how things have been going in spring practice and being out there is the fact that the movement you've seen right now to Graham Knowles, who was essentially kind of penciled in as the backup because he was here last year and he had a little promise and he looks the part at 6'7", 230 pounds, like, a quarterback out of Texas. Those guys kind of like, are kind of have a good history of coming out of playing college football. But yeah, Grady Adamson is the guy that has kind of moved into that backup role and kind of pushed Graham Knowles back a little bit further. And then you got Cole Bergeron, the true freshman, the 4-star out of Louisiana, who's been coming along. So, it's so hard for a true freshman to kind of put his name in the hat, but he has been showing well as well. But yeah, Alberto Mendoza is hands down the leader right now.
I think that's kind of an exciting story to follow if he does wind up being this starting quarterback. Of course, his brother Fernando is about to be taken number 1 overall, but I don't know if he got forced out at Indiana by the coaching staff. He kind of got forced out because they brought in Josh Hoover, who was my number one transfer portal quarterback this offseason when all the guys, and there are a lot of good ones that changed teams this cycle. But I think that creates an opportunity for almost a very similar story to what happened with Fernando. You know, they had brought in other guys and kind of struggled believing in him while at Cal, and Bears fans have to look at what happened and go, Justin Wilcox, what the hell were you doing? What were you missing with this guy? Because he goes to Kurt Signetti and just absolutely flourishes. So where would you place expectations for him going into year one? If, and I don't suspect Brent Key, like most coaches, is going to name a starter with this sort of battle after spring ball, but if he winds up being the starter, what are your expectations for him in that Georgia Tech offense?
Don't mess this up, because here's the thing, man. He has a Ferrari and a Porsche to hand the ball off to, and Justice Haynes and Malachi Hosley. If you don't know about Malachi Hosley, you better pay attention, because that young man is an absolute baller. Hosley was a guy that really stood out to me last year, behind Jamal Haynes, who was a long time, starter at super productive running back at Tech. But Malachi Hosley continued to show throughout the entire year that he was the more productive guy, the more explosive guy. And obviously with Justice Haynes coming in, he was the prize pig, so to speak, in the transfer portal. So yeah, you have a running back combination that has the potential to be one of the better ones in the country. I mean, I had some conversations with some people, who tried to tell me that, that team up 316, that's a highway that's close to Athens. If you get my drift, I don't mention their name.
I got you. No, I'm picking up what you're putting down there, Jarvis.
Right, yeah. So, like he's trying to tell me that, those guys are better, but man, when you really get your eyes on these two young running backs, you really understand that the foundation of this offense is going to be running the football. I've been drilling at home to Tech fans as much as I possibly can. So for Alberto, all he has to do is hit the deep shots, the 2 or 3 times that you're going to take through the field, because I feel like the offensive line is starting to come together. You're starting to see some guys kind of really shine themselves and show they can prove they can be starters in the ACC. They had a couple transfers come in, and I think that as long as that offensive line show improve, I feel like Alberto Mendoza's job is not going to be that hard, because they're going to be running the ball at least 25 to 35 times a game. And all he has to do is just hit those open shots downfield when they take them.
Well, I get where you're coming from on the one hand. And Justice Haynes, for the second straight year, has transferred. And for the second straight year, I came on this show and said, I love where he's going. This is going to work out great. Alabama under Kalen DeBoer was probably the worst place for him to be. And Michigan and Georgia Tech, always committed to running the rock. And I think that can work out really well. Now, on the one hand, does Alberto Mendoza have to light the world on fire and throw for 4,000 yards? No, of course not. He can probably throw for just over half of that, and Georgia Tech can push for an appearance in the ACC championship game. And I don't want folks to forget out there that Georgia Tech started the season 9-0 and was in control of everything in front of them, and unfortunately stumbled a bit down the stretch. But one of the reasons they were in that spot was Haynes King and his legs. And this is why I think quarterback depth is so important for Georgia Tech. Now, Haynes King stayed very healthy relative to how much he was run last year. You think of some other mobile quarterbacks, John Mateer comes to mind. He ran a good amount, and at Oklahoma, got dinged up. It derailed the season a little bit, just as one example. But do you think that same offensive approach for Brent Key is applicable with Mendoza's skill set, where there could be days where Alberto Mendoza runs more than he throws?
No, absolutely not. Buster Faulkner, who was the offensive coordinator, who ended up going to Florida, like you can totally scratch that offense entirely. Like it's going to be something that's going to be totally different. I've talked to some couple of people within the building, and they said that you're not going to see any remnants of Buster Faulkner's offense. And there were times last year where Haynes had at least 3 instances where he had 20 plus carries. That is absolutely ridiculous when you think about like how defenses operate this year. I mean, this in this era of college football, that's a lot of hits, and I don't think that they wouldn't dare put Alberto into that case, because here's the thing: the first time I got my eyes on Alberto, I was like, man, he's not that big of a guy. Like, he's only about 6'2". They say 6'2", but probably 6'1.5". He's probably about 215. He's probably about 210, 208. I'm a real good gauge of weight, because I'm not the smallest person in the world. Spencer, I don't know if you noticed, but yeah, this is one of those things where you can't run that offense. Like, I don't think he would have much success running that type of thing. And then you got the new offense coordinator, George Gossey, trying to bring a more pro style offense. I feel like that'll be a better fit for Alberto. But yeah, I don't expect to see call quarterback runs like you did last year, because Haynes King was a special case, and Alberto Mendoza is not that.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because last I spoke with Brandon Olson of Locked On Gators and talked to him about the idea of Aaron Philo, now expected but not necessarily locked into being Florida's starting quarterback this year. I asked him, are Florida fans ready for the fly sweep quarterback power option offense, which was one of the most unique, but also one of the most fun to watch. I felt like the fly sweep over the years in college football had become a decoy as much as anything, just to make the offense or make the defense freeze for a second. And Buster Faulkner and Brent Key said, no. This is going to be a weapon. This is going to be a big part. And it was one of the most unique offensive systems. And Brandon indicated to me that was a Brent Key kind of playbook or philosophy of how he wanted to run the ball. Do you think that he, being Brent Key, wants to run that system but just doesn't have the personnel to? Or do you think he thinks, okay, I got away with it running my quarterback that much, but now I've got to be able to run the rock without relying on my quarterback so much?
I think it's a little bit closer to the latter. And here's the thing, man. Like, Brent Key is a former offensive lineman. As long as they're turned around and handed that bad boy off, like, that's why I feel like he loaded up at the running back position, because I feel like Malachi Holzer could have been your starter. But if you can get a guy like Justice Haynes to come into the fold, absolutely, you add a guy like that. So as long as the emphasis is on the run, I don't think he cares how you get it done. I think it was just a unique way that Buster came up with, and then you paired that with a special talent like Haynes, and it kind of just, it was like a marriage made in heaven from a running game perspective, because that when you add the quarterback run to an offense, and that gives the defense another man to worry about, right? So you can have so much fun with it, and you saw Buster take advantage of that on a weekly basis, because like, you just have to account for so many things when your quarterback is able to run the rock. But I think Key overall is just, as long as the emphasis is on the run, I don't think he really care how you get to 35, 40 carries, as long as you get there. And because if you get there, that means you are having success doing it. Like, you're not going to pound the rock averaging 2.2 yards a carry at 35 times a clip. So I think right now he's the guy that's saying, okay, we're not going to be able to do what we did last year, because, like I said, one, we don't have the personnel. But as long as we're able to have that foundation of, hey, we're going to run the football, that's going to be our emphasis, I think he'll be fine.
This would be 5 straight years, if Alberto wins the job, that a Mendoza has started Power 4 college football games. What a world to live in. Jarvis Davis enjoying it down there in Georgia Tech land. Host of Locked On Georgia Tech. Check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Jarvis, appreciate it, my man. When I get back to wrap today's show, can Baylor surge back into the title discussion in the Big 12? I am taking yes. Tentatively. I am a tentative yes on Baylor surging this year. First, this episode brought to you by Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. They help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for. Skills, experience, location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. Here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. That's a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. This episode also brought to you by our friends at Robinhood. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood prediction markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood prediction markets changes the game. It's people moving the action. So when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. Check out Robinhood today. I am cautiously optimistic about Baylor. Now, is there a lot of juice in the Bears program right now? No. Do the fans feel particularly excited about Dave Aranda? No, they do not. Do I think Baylor has a schedule that could reignite the passion of Baylor football? Yes, I do believe that is the case. Now, they start out the year with an incredibly difficult matchup that is technically a neutral site game. I mean, it's not in the state that either team actually exists in, but when Baylor travels to Atlanta, Georgia to play Auburn, I have a feeling I know which team is going to have more fans represented. Now, why is that game in Atlanta instead of being at Jordan-Hare Stadium? I don't really know, but I know that those early season neutral site games should always be played on campus. But remember what I said earlier is I buy Baylor surging back towards the top of the Big 12. At the top, we'll see. They have the opportunity with their schedule, but their conference schedule works out in a very interesting way. That game against Auburn, by the way, they're about a 7.5-point underdog, according to our friends at FanDuel. So, after games against Prairie View A&M and Louisiana Tech, Baylor will, in all likelihood, be 2-1 when Big 12 play begins. And they start at home against Colorado, who I absolutely have tagged as a bounce-back team from their 3-9 campaign last year. Are they good enough to go to Waco and win? Baylor fans better bring the juice, because that's a game you can absolutely find yourself losing. And if Dave Aranda, regardless of what he's done in the offseason, bringing in DJ Lagway, that was a big-time splash. I didn't see it coming. I wasn't expecting that. DJ Lagway, who some people picked as the preseason Heisman contender, or one of them out of the SEC a season ago, going to Baylor. No, that's not something that I 100% expected. I know there were some ties that led him to go there. But if you win that game, all right, you're off to a solid start. If you lose that game, the win total, according to FanDuel, is set at 6.5 wins for the entire year. I want to like the over because 7-5 is so unbelievably workable when two of your non-conference games, as most are for schools across the country, are going to be gimme wins. And look, Baylor's got a first-year head coach. Maybe they're not as good as FanDuel thinks they are, and Baylor goes in a neutral site affair in Atlanta and wins that game. But let's say they don't, and they're 2-1. They open with Colorado. Then they go to Tempe. They play Arizona State. Now, that is one of the 4 games on Baylor's schedule that is going to let us know how prepared they are to make a climb, to ascend, to get back to what Baylor football has often been, which is a Big 12 championship game contender. They play 3 of the top 4 teams to end the regular season in the Big 12. But after that game at Arizona State, they don't have to find a way to win that game. Obviously, you'd love to. But after that, in gearing up for this final stretch run, that I'll mention in just a moment, you have got winnable games across the board. Because whatever happens in Tempe, you're going to sit on it for a week because their bye week is October 10th, and then they will rattle off the following 4 games. TCU at home, who, as I talked about yesterday, I'm not feeling great about TCU at the moment. At Kansas, and look, Lance Leipold is still there. Jalen Daniels is not. Serious questions for the Jayhawks there. At UCF, could be a sneaky tough game. They brought in Alonzo Barnett, the Sun Belt Offensive Player of the Year quarterback. He was at James Madison last year, led them to that undefeated Sun Belt slate and conference championship in the college football playoff. And then you've got Iowa State, who is completely resetting everything with first-year head coach Jimmy Rogers. That slate of 4 games. If there's more than 1 loss in that run, then Dave Aranda might be out by the end of the year. Because if you're losing 2 of those 4 games, you're probably winning at most 1 and probably 0 of your final 3. And this is the stretch. In a 3-week span, this is about going into 2026 as brutal as it will get, save for 1 semi-scheduling break to end Baylor's Big 12 season. At BYU on November 14th. One of the toughest places to play in the Big 12. Provo's Electric. Hosting Texas Tech, the reigning champs who are going to be justifiably the preseason favorites once again. And then at Houston. Now, the advantage of having to play those 3 teams in this setup for the Bears is twofold. Number 1, you get Texas Tech at home and Houston on the road. Obviously, those are in-state games, but I would much rather go to Houston than go to Lubbock because one environment is significantly scarier than the other. Both are going to be good teams, but Texas Tech could be great. I think Houston can be good again as they were last year. But Red Raiders fans support that football program far better than Houston fans do, just for what it's worth. So that stretch of games, unbelievably difficult. But here's the other thing. You have those 4 preceding games to get yourself ready. Whatever happens in the first 6 games of the year, and you get your break right at that midway point, or just before the midway point in the season. It is 5 games because I'm learning to count in real time here to wrap today's show of Locked On College Football. Whatever happens there, you have got 4 very winnable games. You can view them as tune-up opportunities, and look, for Baylor, quite frankly, they're not. They're opportunities to show that Dave Aranda should still be the head coach, but I don't think even Dave Aranda can go 0-3 against BYU, Texas Tech, and Houston. I don't know that is feasible. It might be a good test for how hot his seat actually is. But with DJ Lagway back there are worse quarterback options, far worse quarterback options in the country than DJ Lagway. Early reports are good that he's picked up the offense well. Name to keep an eye on here to help him pop and reach his full potential, which obviously he didn't do with now James Madison coach Billy Napier. Lewis Brown IV, wide receiver that the coaching staff, Jake Spavital, the OC, very high on there in Waco. So if that connection becomes real, and if Baylor's defense, which is Dave Aranda's calling card, of course, is a former defensive coordinator, if those 2 things figure themselves out, I don't hate the schedule for Baylor. Beat at least one of Colorado and Arizona State, take care of business, and then try to become road warriors at the end. It is a difficult Big 12 schedule. It is absolutely difficult. But if that collection of factors comes together in the way that it needs to for Dave Aranda to have job security, I do buy Baylor being towards the top. I don't think at the top. I can't put you at the top on paper when you have to play at Arizona State, at BYU, at Houston, and Texas Tech. That's pretty brutal. The way that it gets spaced out helps them in a significant way. So I am cautiously optimistic about Baylor. How about that optimism? to wrap today's show. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.